Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Educating Adventures. Today we're going to be talking quite a bit about oxygen. Oxygen is a very important element because every living thing in the world needs oxygen to survive. We get oxygen from the air, as many land animals do. We breathe it into our lungs, but organisms that live in soil and organisms that live in water also need oxygen for survival. Today, we're going to talk about how oxygen in the air moves around into different places in the environment through something called aeration. Let's get into it. All right, before we really get into aeration, let's talk for just a second longer about oxygen, because we probably should figure out where oxygen comes from. Oxygen is formed by plants and algae when they go through a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process used by plants and algae where they take carbon dioxide and water and sunlight, and they go through this amazing process where they change it into energy for themselves and oxygen. If you want to learn more about photosynthesis, be sure to check out our photosynthesis adventure. Most plants release oxygen into the atmosphere as a gas. That's what we use. When we take in a big breath of air, it goes down into our lungs, and our lungs fill up with that air, and our lungs pull tiny oxygens out and add it to our bloodstream. And that's how we breathe. But we did say that organisms that live in soil and organisms that live in water also need oxygen. When air moves into a substance like soil or water, we call that aeration. Let's take a little bit of time to figure out how aeration happens. Let's start first with aeration in the soil. Aeration in the soil is important for any type of organism that lives in the soil, but it's also important for plants because remember, that's where their roots are. Plants need oxygen in the air around them, but they do also need air and oxygen down by their roots as well. Aeration in soil typically occurs thanks to a bunch of tiny little animals that are moving around in and under the soil. Animals that live underground are called fossorial, and fossorial animals are typically very important for aeration. If we think of some of those fossorial animals like earthworms, ants, termites, even soil mites, which some of them are so small we can barely see them, all of these animals crawl around in the soil. They create these tunnels, these pathways that oxygen and nutrients can move around within the soil. The animals that we mentioned before are certainly not the only example of animals that help with aeration. In fact, if you went outside and you started digging around in your garden, I have a feeling you might find a few examples of your own. Now let's switch gears from soil to water, because we did also say that organisms that live in water need oxygen from the water to survive. So that's plants, algae, and animals too. Animals that live in water, many of them breathe using gills instead of using lungs. But they do work in a similar way because like our lungs pull oxygens from the air, gills do the same thing in water. As water passes over their gills pull oxygens from the water, add it to their bloodstream, and that's how they breathe. Aeration in water occurs quite naturally when the water is fast moving. Think of something like an ocean, which has these big crashing waves. The water is always being churned up. As those waves crash, they pull in air, they pull in oxygen, kind of like with all those bubbles. They mix it up into the water. That's going to add oxygen from the air into the water that plants, algae, and animals can use to survive. A very similar thing happens in fast-moving rivers that's churned up a lot, and especially near waterfalls. If we picture something that's a bit more still, like a pond or a lake, they're not getting as much aeration from the water moving around as the ocean or a fast-moving river. But they do still need to have oxygen in that environment for organisms to survive in there. So oxygen can be added to these still water environments in a couple different ways. When plants and algae in the water go through photosynthesis, they add oxygen to the water. When it rains, those droplets can pull oxygen into the water as well, pull in the air when the droplet hits the water. And when animals move in and out of those ponds or lakes, that can pull in some air and oxygen as well. Now here's where things get kind of funny, because sometimes if humans have built something or created something, planted something, and there's not a proper amount of aeration, we kind of take matters into our own hands. Sometimes when people have big yards, big lawns, people may aerate the soil on their own by using these big tools that punch these tunnels, these holes into the ground, similar to how an animal would when they move in and out. So that's going to help the grass in their yard get all that oxygen by their roots and help them to grow. Let's say we have people who build a little pond or a lake in their neighborhood. They might add something like a fountain to help get that water moving around, splashing around, which will help aerate the water as well. All right, you guys, now that we know what aeration is, why it's important, and how it happens, I think we better test our knowledge. Be sure to click that link below to visit our website where you will find quizzes, activities, projects, and so much more. And I hope we see you guys next time at our next adventure. Thank you so much. Bye.